Morning, everyone. Um, I think before we start, I would like to have all the other three panelists on the stage itself before I introduce them. Yeah. Thanks once again to all of you for being here and for being part of this conversation. My name is Venu. I'm currently a member of the faculty in Azim-Premji University. I also have for many years been a teacher in schools, and now I'm in the university. My interests, like the MC said, are in education, philosophy of education, and I also have a larger amateur interest in issues of development. We have very eminent and interesting people in the panel today. Some of them have already been introduced, so I will not repeat all the introductions. To my right is Mr. S. Vishwanath. He's trained as an engineer and urban planner, but currently is involved with issues of water management and development. Professor Kamal Bawa, who founded ATRI, he's already talked to us, so I will not repeat much that has been said. And Mr. Harish Hande, he is the managing director of CELCO, a social enterprise involved with sustainable energy issues. So, I would like to think of this brief conversation. Considering the enormity of the issues we are going to look at, it's going to be a very brief conversation, just about 45 minutes. I would like to think of it as a story. And I would like to give a very brief introduction to the story before I invite the panelists to talk about their interests and perspectives. Almost like a Panchatantra story. However, it's very different from a standard story in two fundamental ways. The first difference is that the story is still evolving. We don't know how it ends. So we are used to listening to stories where we know how the stories end or how the stories might end. To make it more interesting, this particular story, we don't know how it's going to end. The second interesting feature is that we are all part of this story. So there is no one who can really stand outside the story and tell it to us. So each one of us, how we look at the situation, how we feel about the story, how we see the facts of the story, that's all part of the story. So it makes the story quite complex. And it keeps changing all the time. So therefore, when you're listening to this conversation, you have to imagine how you feel about what you're hearing and how you're going to be part of the story. Right? And also the good thing is that unless in a classroom where sometimes a teacher thinks that he or she can tell you what the story is like, the way you think about the story is as much true. Some parts of the story are about things which we can't control, but since each one of us, it is a story about us, and therefore we can be very much an active player in the story. If that's clear, let's go on. Ready? Okay. So the title of this discussion is about sustainable development. So the term has two words, sustainable and development. And both these words have been with us for many decades. And putting it simply, development is the idea that the lives of a vast majority of people in this country and all over the world can be much better than it is. what does it mean to have a much better life? One of the ways of thinking about it is that you can have better standards of living. People can be less poor. They can be more educated in the truest sense of the term, can have better health care and better health. Let's take that as the sense of development we are interested in. And the idea is that there is much that can be done to make life better for most of the people around. When the discussion of development started, most people, let's say the smart people who were thinking about development, felt that development could be achieved because we are getting smarter and more educated, we are getting better governments, and we can continue to use the resources of nature for producing more things, better things, and doing things better. Then came along another set of people, and some people from the same set who talked about development, and they said that, look, nature cannot support what we want to do forever. For two reasons, at least two reasons. One is that there isn't enough in nature to go on supplying what we want. Secondly, like us ourselves as biological beings, when we use resources of nature, we produce a lot of waste. And getting rid of that waste is also a problem. So if both having more things to make life better, and in making those things, making things worse, right? They said, look, this is not sustainable. The next point is that another set of thoughts came along and said, can we put these two ideas together, sustainable and development? Can development be made sustainable? What does that mean? Sustainable in the sense that we can continue to think of a better life, a good life for the vast majority of people in this country and elsewhere, without making it difficult for our future generations to have the same good life. It seems like a simple question. And when we think about it, when the experts think about it, the difficulty is that the answers are not simple. And then if you do what I suggested that we must do, put ourselves in the picture, all right, it gets more complex. So this conversation is a beginning, as if this question has not been asked before, as if we are all trying to invent the answer all afresh, to be part of this dialogue. And in doing that, if each one of us feels that we are part of that dialogue and part of that story, and then if a large number of us start thinking about it together, the story will change. So it's not the story that is happening independent of us, the story might change. And that is the most interesting part of the story. So without saying anything much more, I'm going to invite the three panelists to talk about three different parts of this story which are of specific interest to them. So Mr. Vishnath is going to talk about water, the story of water, right? And how water fits into this issue or this challenge of sustainable development. Professor Baba is going to talk about, after Mr. Vishnath, I would request Mr. Hande to talk about the area that he's working with, that is about energy, and how does energy and the use of energy fits into the question of sustainable development. Finally, Professor Baba will talk about ecosystems and the relationship of ecosystems to sustainable development. So the first part of this conversation, for the next 10-15 minutes, each of them is going to talk about the relationship or the areas they are interested in to the question of development. We will follow that up with talking about the nature of sustainability and how these very same issues relate to sustainability. And finally, we will end with talking about whether sustainable development, where we can understand each of these three domains in interesting ways, which are both sustainable and contribute to development in interesting ways. Okay? Vishnu.
Yeah, thanks. I'll sort of continue the storyline and present to you which I believe is one way of looking at water in the Indian context and trying to understand or make sense of it. Because water in itself is such a huge subject, it's very difficult to grapple with all its complexities. So let me put this proposition to you, that we as in India, we are a groundwater civilization. And that the well, or the open well, I hope some of you have seen an open well. I hope many of you have seen open wells. I hope a lot more will continue to see open wells as things go along in our country. But I'll use the metaphor of the open well as what it has meant for us as civilization and what it has meant to us right now in terms of sustainable development. Let me put it to you that the Indus Valley civilization or the Saraswati civilization, which is what we are famous for, which we think of as river basin-based civilizations, were actually groundwater civilizations. Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, Dholavira, if you go there, every house had an open well. The Indus flowed nearby, the Saraswati flowed nearby, but water was drawn from the well. Let me put it to you that water, the well, released mankind or humankind from the tyranny of surface water flows. When humankind discovered that you could dig a hole in the ground and get water, this was perhaps the first conquest, and I put it within quotes, of nature. That humankind was now able to move on into vast tracts of land and cultivate and develop agriculture based on the fact that you could now find water which was below the ground. So we are a well civilization, an open well civilization. 6,000 years to 8,000 years old, we have had the open well as our source of water. The open well has many, many metaphors. It talks to us. That's the first thing. It's functional, it provides us water. It communicates, it talks to us, it tells us that summer is coming. Water tables are starting to go down. Use me wisely, use me slowly. It tells me that this has been a year of drought. You do not have access to too much of this resource. Or it tells me that this is a year of plenty. The well is full and the well overflows, and I can use the well water. So it's functional, it's sending signals, and it's also an indicator. If you're overusing groundwater, the well water level falls. If you're polluting the landscape, putting fertilizers, pesticides, or chemicals, the well is the first indicator for you. And what's happened to us as a civilization over the last 40 years is that we have lost the open well. And therefore, we've lost ecological signal communication to us. No longer does the tap or the borewell talk to us. No longer does it influence behavior. And no longer are we able to respond to the ecological scarcity of a particular natural resource, in this case, water. So if we want to set ourselves a future for sustainable development, and many of my friends are from Kerala also, the single largest density of open wells in the world, India, single largest number of bore wells and wells in the world, 30 million of them. So we are a well civilization, a groundwater civilization. I would put forward to you, from the energy perspective, an open well has the lowest embodied energy for drawing water. You can draw that water without electricity, also in case of need and convenience. So in itself, it combines many things. And I would put forward a vision for India to say that if we want sustainable development, we should go to the open well, which is dynamically rechargeable every year, and which is a ground or a basis of limits to use, and limits to consumption. That would be a short story on water and the wells from my point.
Would you say that what's happening in development with relation to water and wells is something of deep concern? What is the concern right now?
It is how we unleash technology for our own good. For example, the coming of the bore wells or the borewell rig in itself has been a single biggest factor which has started to destroy the linkages between us and the consumption of water. Though it has provided great benefits in the immediate term, in the long term, it is going to be a problem.
So we hear a lot of news about falling groundwater levels. Would you say that this loss of connection actually with what is happening to water is one of the reasons why we are facing some of the difficulties with groundwater levels?
Absolutely. We are no longer in touch with the signal. In urban areas, the only signal we get about the ecological availability or the scarcity of water is a water bill, if we get one at all. So now the bill does not communicate what is happening to our rivers, what is happening to our forests, what is happening to our catchments, and what is happening to groundwater.
So what Vishwanath is telling us, as I understand it, is that somehow a very, very key life need, or what you call life support system like the water system, we don't really get a first-hand understanding of what is happening. We are lost touch with it. So we don't know whether we are using it wisely. It seems that we are not using it wisely. It's getting polluted. And so there is a kind of a loss of connection. What about energy? What would Harish tell us about it?
You know, fortunately they switched it off. It was like this, you know, this TV in front of us. It's like it's the counting down the minutes. It's like as if a bomb is going to go off when it comes to zero. No, I see. The thing is that most of them, a lot of them are from schools, and I would like to address to the school kids directly, because sustainable development is, a lot of us have made it more complicated by writing about it. And it is not actually very complicated. We make it complex. The solutions are very simple, and a lot of us, you and me, can actually do that when we go back home today. It's not very complex. It's something, if we have the willpower to do it, we can do it. A very simple example. A lot of school children have come here, right? How many of you have actually studied under kerosene lights? No, school children, not the... How does it, you actually go back, when the power goes off, many of you have UPSs. Go and try reading it for one day for 4 hours, right? That is the situation of 60% of our school-going kids in the country. 60% of your brothers, sisters, cousins, fellow Indians read under kerosene lights. So it's like if you're running a 100-meter race, right? You all have sports day, you're reading 100, right? You all are starting at 50 meters, and the rural kids are starting at 0 meters. So are you happy to run that competition? Are you? Then it's your responsibility to make sure that they also come at 50, or you all also start at 0, right? You don't want to go to 0, you don't want to study under kerosene lights. So it's your responsibility to bring them to 50-meter mark, so you're all together. That is sustainable development for our country. For us is, how do you actually make sure that all the students, I'm just taking one example, there's lots of other examples, but in lighting alone, how do you, like for example, we did a small demonstration in a small house in Haveri. The girl is in 8th class, did not ever see an electric bulb. After 130 years that Thomas Alva Edison invented the bulb, 65 years of independence, 55% of the households in our country still don't have electricity. So are you happy about that? No, right? The kid, we put a demonstration in our house, and she started, when you put a demo, you remove the demo after a week. When we started to remove, she started shouting and crying and howling. Please don't remove the light from my house. I want to study. I want to be a good student. What would you do? Right? That is where, because of, and the father had nothing to afford. He was very poor. He was a pottery maker, obviously, and then obviously through a bank loan and all, we did that, and 14 other houses got it. Can you believe that she was crying because there was no light? So when you go back home today, when your father says switch off the light, remember what that girl said. That girl had more respect for light than many of us today. Does this auditorium require so many lights? Look it up. Right? This is unsustainable development.
Or the freezing temperature.
Air conditioning. This is unsustainable development. See, these are simple things. This is not complex. We could have actually designed this auditorium much better with better lighting, right? We could have, it's Bangalore weather. Why do I sit here with all the sunlight outside and the air conditioner on in January? This is unsustainable development. Is it very complex to create a solution? We don't want to do it, right? Now, why I'm saying it is in your hands, the youngsters, the children, the school kids, to actually show us the way. Small things of rather than watching 3 hours of TV, don't watch TV. It's a better sustainable development. You generate less electricity for the nation. In each one of you watches 3 hours of TV every day, which is 90 hours in a month. You calculate over a year, you're watching it for 1.5 months of TV. You're watching 1.5 months of TV, 8 hours you sleep. That is 3 months. So 4.5 months you're sleeping and watching TV. That's unsustainable development. Sustainable development, switch off the TV so the Raichur thermal plant doesn't need to have more coal. So that the same electricity or energy in a different form, whether it's solar or can be given to the kids who can actually read, so the country can actually sustainably develop. The same girl, do you know, who does not have light, what she does during the daytime in the morning? How many of you get up and go and collect wood for your house so that your mother can cook? You're very shout when mother gives you breakfast. She goes and collects wood for her, then comes back, studies, goes to school. She's not starting at 0. She's starting at minus 50 meters. That is unsustainable development. Sustainable development does not mean energy, water. It's the whole ecosystem of humanity, of people, education, kids. Everything is sustainable development. And we all, and especially telling to the younger generation here, because we have spoiled it for you. You are the solution. We have to learn from you. Because when you go and tell your father, switch off the AC in the car, he will listen to you, not your mother. Same vice versa, mother, father, whoever is the boss at any point of time. Right? You can actually make that change. And that is sustainable development. And energy, and the beauty of being in India is that if I'm in Western Ghats, where Dr. Baba is an expert of, I would look at small hydro, pico hydro, not big. If I go to Gujarat, I will look at mix of solar and biogas. If I look at hostels, I will look at human waste, converting them to electricity. If I go to Orissa and parts of Karnataka, I will look at small solar, small wind, small. So just like the Panchayati Raj system is about decentralized democracy, we have to look at decentralized energy, decentralized solution. Energy is just one part of the whole equation. It does not mean that, okay, if I have solar, just because this auditorium is powered by, suppose we put up solar on this auditorium, running all the ACs and all the lights using, it's not sustainable development, I'm sorry. You're actually wasting more solar panels to power lighting which was not needed in the first place. Sustainable development means how do you match what is the appropriate lighting, what is the appropriate temperature according to, I believe, I know I'm sitting in a place which is sponsored by IT. Many of the IT companies in this city of Bangalore do not need glass. But a lot of the buildings are glass in Bangalore. You trap the heat and say I have environment-friendly air conditioners is not sustainable development. Right? So sustainable development means the holistic, how do you respect the nature, where you are, whether it's Haveri, Bangalore, and look at the local needs, local culture, build it according to the nature of that place. And how do you utilize water, how do you utilize energy, how do you develop the people from zero, how do you provide, your all aim should be, how do we provide sustainably lighting, proper lighting to the 55% of the kids, rather than depending on saying that, okay, we need coal and nuclear. India cannot sustain on coal or nuclear. We do not have, the world does not have enough coal. And nuclear is a problem that we are actually offloading to the future generation. India has enough natural resources. I will leave it at that because that's what I would say, go fundamentally think that it's not a very complex. What is sustainable development is when you go back home, just ask yourself, do I need this lighting? Do I need this extra piece of paper? And think in those ways. Thank you.
Thanks, Harish. I request Professor Baba to talk about how the notion or how the relationship of the ecosystem as a whole relates to both development and the kind of questions of energy and water.
Thank you. I should say Harish stole my thunder to some extent. I was also counting the lights in the auditorium, but gave up after I reached 100. I think there are three things I'll try to do. I'll try to talk about the environment in a way we often don't think about the environment. I'll try to link the issue of ecosystems or biodiversity with the issue of water and energy. And thirdly, I'd like to pick up some issues which Harish has raised. First, about ecosystems. We have in India a range of ecosystems. Our forests, our rivers, our lakes, our oceans have an incredible diversity of life which does not exist in many places on earth. There is a diversity of life which doesn't occur anywhere else except in areas, small areas, like Western Ghats. I say small areas because now forests are confined to very small areas. In the Himalayas, in central India, along our very large water bodies, Chilika Lake, Vembanath, and then, of course, oceans which surround these areas. And we are destroying these ecosystems at an unprecedented rate. I think you all know about it. I think if 40 or 50 years ago, if you wanted to enjoy wilderness, you probably had to travel 5 or 7 kilometers out of Bangalore. Now you have to travel probably 5 or 7 hours to enjoy wilderness. Maybe 20 years from now, you may have even to go outside the country to some wilderness. But our wilderness, our natural ecosystems sustain all our economic activities. It is from these ecosystems we get water, natural ecosystems. Watersheds, our major watersheds are located in natural ecosystems. Water, in turn, is a source of energy. Fossil fuels are dead plants, and they died many, many millions of years ago and formed coal and oil. So what are the challenges we face? And we are mining this nature to fuel our development. We dam the river in remote part of Arunachal Pradesh so we can illuminate this auditorium with 1,000 lights. The person who is living near that dam is deprived of the water, poor farmer, and faces the consequences of our unlimited and unsustainable consumption patterns. Issue of sustainable development is often couched in terms of environment and development. No. It's a social issue. It's a moral issue. The major problem with our development pattern is not sustainable, that it lacks sustainability. It does. But the major problem is the inequities it creates. We have millions of children who go undernourished or hungry to bed, and we accept that day after day without really doing anything. Our major educational institutions don't address the issue of environment and the linked issue of poverty and the linked issues of development that is destroying the environment and creating this divide between different sectors of the society. We have options here sitting in Bangalore. If the lights go out, we can put on the generator. A person living in rural areas, a poor person, when the forest goes, the woman in that household has to travel 2 extra miles to get fuel wood to cook food. So these are the real issues of development. I think these are the real issues of sustainability. And I think unless we find a mechanism, unless we improve governance, unless, as Harish emphasized, we moved into a decentralized governance and a more participatory development, a more inclusive development, we are going to have more severe problems that we generally don't think about. Sustainable development is not destroying birds or trees. It is, but it's much more than that.
Thank you. I would like to come back to some of the very important points that Professor Bawa raised, but I would like to go back to Harish and Vishnath. What I gathered from both of them said is that energy and water, there are two kinds of issues. One is that a lot of people who need these things don't have it. The second, equally or second important issue is that you don't have it where it is needed most. There is too much light, some places where it need not be, and this hall being given as the example. And there it might be that the stage is so well lit, as someone said, because people sitting here and our generation is the problem and the solution is outside here, right? But be that as it may, what we have is not distributed or not distributed well enough. So my question first to Harish and then to Vishnath is, how do you see in energy and water, how much of our attention should go to producing more of these things and how much should go to distributing that where it is needed?
And before going into the production and the distribution, I would first look at the needs. Because see, what has happened today is that when we design saying that India is shortage of X amount of energy and we need so many coal-fired plants or coal nuclear plants, we are sitting in Delhi or Bangalore and deciding for the poor what they need, deciding for ourselves what we need, and design on that, which does not include enormous amount of inefficiencies, right? Inefficiencies that built in as if, okay, we now take inefficiency as part of our life, and then we design, and then if you look at today in South Canara, just a simple example of South Canara, one of the districts in Karnataka, if you replace all the incandescent by LED lights, you actually are equivalent to a 1,000 megawatt coal-fired plant. Okay, now, because we are thinking they're going to be run on incandescent, or we need to have 1,000 megawatt, I think we need to relook at how do we design. So today what's happened is, frankly, the way we have solutions and we are trying to fit the problem to it. Okay, well, how do I fit in? Oh, we need to fit in, right? We have to rework and say, what is that 70-80% of the population need? What is those problems? Those problems, oh, a person just needs 2 lights for 4 hours. Why are we designing that everybody needs 24? How many of you use lights for 24 hours? And even if there is light, how many of you use it actually? Right? I think there has to be a paradigm shift from being looked this as a consumer society to an asset creation. Okay, is that creating assets at the rural level, at the poor, and then redesign it, and suddenly you will see efficiency-wise, we actually don't need to build large coal-fired plants right now. Once you look at efficiency, needs of the poor, there are a lot of energy services in our country, solutions in our country, that needs to get decentralized. I'll go back to the 1970s history of how India became self-sufficiency in food. I'm not talking of the efficiency of food supply, but as he said, Professor Baba, that actually that's 40, if you read the Hindu last week, 42% of our kids below 5 are malnourished. Also, that's because of the inefficiency of the food supply. But food, there is enough that was because the agricultural reforms that happened in the 1970s and the way Indira Gandhi actually then forced the banks to create the banking system, there are 40,000 rural banks in our country, which actually provide services to the poor in many different, might be inefficient. I think we need to go back to that decentralized model to look at the needs of the energy and then redesign. Today, I don't think so that the answers are in Delhi and Bangalore at all.
Vishnu?
Yeah, on the waterfront, we are endowed with a certain amount of water every year, annually replenishable water.
Exactly.
If you talk about it, and if you want to put a number, that's about 4,000 billion cubic meters. That's all we have. It's likely to come back the next year as rain, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. Maybe with climate change, these things will alter in terms of the regularity of supply. But that's what you have. And that's as India as a whole. This is one of the richest endowed nations vis-a-vis water. Right? But it rains less in Rajasthan. It rains a heck of a lot in Cherrapunji, or used to. So communities have over time figured out that this was the ecological resource they had, and then modified their lives to manage that. But with centralized systems and planning, we're wanting to shift water where it is not available, and we want to create demands, and we want to sort of equalize where it cannot be equalized, because it's an ecological cost aspect to water. I just want to touch briefly on the second very important issue. This is a country which has perhaps one of the largest number of deaths due to bad water and bad sanitation. Right. And sanitation is something that we really have to talk about when we talk with water. 650 million Indians do not have a toilet, go in the open to defecate. That is a major problem. This should be also a national shame, as much as malnutrition is a national shame. This is a national shame. So we have to relook at all these and look at what kind of behavior changes and what kind of responses to ecological availability, but also social contexts is possible for us to achieve, so that we change this situation. Decentralization insofar as water is concerned, behavior change, and education, and getting sanitation right in places. These would make a huge difference.
Would you say that there is a balance to be achieved from making more water available by whatever means and distributing it? Or would you again, like Harish is saying in the case of energy, say that redefining need and then understanding efficiency and utilization is a better approach?
Well, it's a no-brainer. I mean, it has to be the latter part. But our design systems say that we need to provide 40 liters of water for every rural Indian. This is just drinking water, irrespective of whether it's Rajasthan or Kerala. And 150 liters of water per person in an urban area, irrespective of whether the city is next to the Ganges or it's like Bangalore, about 100 kilometers away from a river. So we have to relook at our planning paradigms, relook at our standards, relook at what we want to achieve, and draw up more reasonable terms of access, so that there is some for all rather than all for some.
So one of the questions I would like to repeat again when we come to the end of this conversation, which I think has to be in the next 10 or 15 minutes, to talk about the whole notion of conservation. You talked about ecosystems being the foundation of development and sustainable development, and at the same time that the ecosystems which underpin our own well-being are seriously under threat in some way. So is the notion of conservation, protecting it, is that still an important plank in the way we address it? Is that something we should be worrying about? Or if we really look at how, understand sustainable development in the right way, ecosystems will get protected?
Certainly, no, the ecosystems will not get protected in the way we are trying to protect them for two reasons. One is that we still think that ecosystems are there for us to enjoy the beauty of nature and for us to see birds and plants and tigers if we can afford tiger safaris. But ecosystems are much more than that. I think it's well known. Ecosystems provide us important services, and we all know that. We have talked about the water. They have spiritual significance. They have aesthetic value, and so on and so forth. But we take it for granted that they are free. All these things are available to us free. And therefore, we are not really very concerned about their sustainable use. And the second reason why we cannot conserve, so just to follow the first point, so people have now started to assign economic value to these ecosystems, so that if you destroy these ecosystems, you lose by this much. And I think many young children may not know, or they may know, all nations keep some sort of accounting system, how much assets they have, physical assets, how much the services they provide, and that goes into the calculation of gross domestic product. But in those accounting, we don't consider our stocks of forest, our stock for fresh lake, and so on and so forth. Now the systems are being put into place in many places where we will include that accounting, so that we can keep an annual account of those assets and then see year after year how we are doing. As we follow the GDP growth year after year, we will also follow the changes in our natural assets. The second point, we cannot protect the way we are trying to conserve in the form of national parks and so on and so forth, that the strategy we use marginalizes local people. It doesn't address their concerns, and we have, again, like everything else, a highly centralized way of governing and managing our resources, and the solution to that is decentralized governance of those resources, participatory management that addresses the need to conserve and sustainably use our natural assets, but also that addresses the need to conserve, to improve the livelihoods of local communities. I want to make one point. There is a fairly good correlation between incidence of high levels of wilderness or biodiversity and poverty. And there is a reason for that. The reason for that is that humankind have used the best land everywhere and converted into agricultural land or other areas. And the areas where nature still exists are very marginal lands. They are rocky, they are hilly, and you can't make easily living out of those lands. And that's why those areas have been sort of, to some extent, conserved. But those lands and people who have more resources, of course, they will have access to better land. Marginal communities will be pushed to marginal lands. And so there is a relationship, and we have to be concerned about the local communities that are living in and around these areas and how to make them partners in conservation, which currently is not the case.
I would like to come back to a question with Harish. You said that understanding our need in a different manner, that's what I understood from what I said, is an important part of what we should do. But your own organization is involved in identifying need and making provisions. And to that extent, you're trying to increase the amount of energy available where it is needed, right? Why are you doing that?
Not increasing.
Okay.
We're not increasing at all. We are basically displacing kerosene and candles. And so we are not actually increasing. For basics of, for education, health, people are already, today are living on kerosene and candles, right? You're not, So I think we are replacing that. But what we are replacing that is also with a typical example that I would say, which you will understand what I mean by needs, is when a poor farmer, actually an auto rickshaw driver, came and said, I want a 3-light solar system. 3 lights, I want 3 lights, he said. If he had grid electricity, he would have taken 3 lights because he has 3 rooms. Because you think in terms of solar, and we knew that he could not afford the 3-light solar system, but the technician who was very smart, he said, let me come to your house. He went to the house, broke a top of the roof, and put 1 light. And he needed light in 3 rooms, he did not need 3 lights. So with 1 light, the light was in all 3 rooms. Right? Had he had grid electricity, he would have wasted 3 times. Just now, we look at, have we looked at the needs in a very different manner? That's what needs is. With 1 light, all 3 rooms were lit. Okay, so that's what I mean by needs. And what we are replacing in kerosene and candles, an amount of money, I mean, it's not funny, the amount of money, like for example, in Mysore or anywhere else, you go to any rural area, at least 10 to 15% of their income people spend on candles and kerosene. If the same amount of money is given to a bank, they actually can afford a solar system, destroying the myth that solar is expensive. Like average street vendor in Bangalore spends 15 rupees a day on kerosene, lighting. Go to any of these streets. Many of the kids, you calculate and ask your parents, do they spend 450 rupees for 1 light on a monthly basis, leave alone kerosene? If you had 4 lights or 5 lights, you would have been spending 2,000 rupees. Your father would have sold your car. The question is, it's not, and the poor actually pay. And the solar for her works out to be 6 rupees 50 paisa. What we are not doing extra energy. We are matching the needs for either the quality of life or increased incomes. And that is what we call it as sustainable development.
And coming back to water, urbanization, in the sense increasing numbers of people are moving into, or the areas where they live are becoming urbanized, and access to water in the traditional sense with open wells is becoming more difficult. So going forward, how do you see the kind of responses that our society can make in terms of making water available? How do you square that with the fact that the traditional ways of accessing water through wells, or in a way that is more attuned to the environment, may no longer be available? How do you see that challenge being addressed?
Well, we're faced with this dilemma. Take the city itself. This city, Bangalore, was dependent on the Arkavati River, which flows about 35 kilometers from here. Now it sucked up the Arkavati River dry. Now it's moved on to the Kaveri. This is the paradigm we are in. Kaveri is 100 kilometers away. Nothing is being done about catchment management or ensuring that the river waters will flow, which is this city's responsibility, because this is the single largest consumer of that water. So we have that paradigm of going farther and farther for water, or we have a paradigm at looking at our lakes and tanks, of looking at the rainfall that comes here, of looking at recreating wells. And I have enough and more anecdotal stories from Bangalore itself, where people have collected rooftop rainwater and put it into their old open wells. The open wells have sprung back to life. These people have to be incentivized. The wrong incentives are now going into the system. Somebody who's hooked onto the pipeline, the point which was being made, pays 6 rupees per 1,000 liters of water. A poor person who buys water in a slum pays 2 rupees for a pot of water. So we're sending the wrong economic signals, therefore resulting in wrong ecological answers to the problem. If we send the right signals, then we'll have the right solutions. And it will have to be a mix of both. It cannot be only open wells. It will have to be river water, but also open wells and rainwater and recycled water will start to play much more of a role.
A last question to Professor Bawa. You said it's a moral issue. Can you expand on that? Many of these issues of sustainable development are moral issues. What did you mean by that?
I think when society is willing to accept the type of inequities we are dealing with in terms of the use of natural resources, as well as in the benefits that flow out of development, it becomes a moral issue. To what extent, you are willing to accept that statement with those facts. I mean, to me, it's as simple as that.
I'm afraid we have come to the end of time available, but not to the end of the issue itself. If I may attempt a very brief summary of what the kind of points that have emerged in this conversation. One, we need to think about the problem differently. It's not about think for solutions, but think about the problems differently. That's one thing I heard mentioned. Because we're used to think in terms of, I don't have X, how can I get more of X, whether it is water or energy. It doesn't matter how much I have. So for instance, the kind of gadgets we buy in the cities, and which increasing incomes makes it possible for most of us in this hall, they all need more energy, right? And the kind of gadgets we buy to make life easier for us, in terms of washing machines, in terms of dryers, in terms of even air conditioners, they all need more energy and water. So the problem then becomes how to get more of it, and what the panelists are telling us is that that's a wrong way to go about it, and that is definitely not sustainable. And if it is not sustainable now, what it means is that the future generations will really not be able to have a good life at all. The second point is that we are our brother's keepers, that there is no way we can morally live with consuming and hoping for greater and greater consumption without really thinking about what other people are doing and what other people have. Most of us manage to go through our every day without worrying about it. It doesn't make sense to worry ourselves silly about it, but it does make sense to be deeply and profoundly concerned about it. That is the second message I get. The last message I want to reiterate is the one we started with. No amount of talking on this platform by 3, 4, 5, 10 people is going to really make a difference. It is how you become part of the stories, individually and collectively. And I would like to stop with that. Thank you.